Are you also there, Pedro?
Yes, Maria.
So I think we can resume for the next part of our session. So we can behave better because we are not, unfortunately, we are not face to face, so we don't spend more time on the coffee break. So I think we can all return and be back to the sessions on time. So we have two more speakers, and Pedro, you just removed the slides, but I can mention. So now we have Camila Gonzalez Arango from SPAR, and she's going to talk us a little bit on how to enhance the public transport resilience by combining it with the demand responsive transport. And she will tell us a little bit on the Spanish learnings from Palma de Mallorca. And while Camila shared the screen, she's definitely passionate about sustainable mobility and innovation. And she has been involved in academic research and consultancy regarding innovation and urban sustainable mobility, both in Latin America and in Europe. So she has a broad experience, and she has been working in on-demand mobility for SPAR. And we are looking forward to hear what you can tell us about the lessons learned from Spain.
Thank you, Maria. Hello, everyone. I'm Camila with SPAR, and I'm going to talk to you about how to enhance public transport resilience when it goes in combination with demand responsive transport. And this comes from the learnings from a use case that we ran in Palma de Mallorca with our partner EMT. So first, for those who don't know us too much, I would like to introduce SPAR. We're a Canadian software company specialized in on-demand transport. We developed a self-serve platform that allows to plan, operate, and analyze any kind of transport network or flexible transport network in seconds. And we say in seconds because we focus on making things easy and easy to use for the operator, flexible and open for further integration. So I'd like to start talking about the use case in Palma. So for those who, I think most of us know that Mallorca is a very touristic place. The city of Palma, it's a mid-sized city in Spain. Their modal split for public transport is around 15%, so they have quite a bit of room for improvement. And they deal with seasonality because of the same touristic approach. They have 12 main corridors. It's big bus lines. And they have 14 low-frequency fixed lines that go to low-density areas, especially suburban and rural areas. Inside this sustainable urban mobility plan, they had planned to replace some of these fixed lines to something more flexible on demand, because there is not enough demand and the frequency is quite low, so it's not even a good quality service for users. And they had implemented some manual demand responsive transport service with taxis, and they wanted to optimize it. The thing is that they didn't find the correct timing to do this yet. And then COVID came with the ridership decline that every PTO, public transport operator, experienced in Europe or in the world. And for them, it came as an opportunity to try out this kind of services and to replace those lines that have very low frequency with these on-demand services. So on top of that, of course, they had to keep and to maintain this basic service for critical staff. And at the same time, taxis had very little work as well. So it was a good opportunity to just try to implement it. The solution that they came up with is to replace those lines with both their minibuses that they owned and the taxis that were available in the island and in the city. The objectives were to reduce average travel time, both in waiting and in vehicle for users, and practically have control of every trip in real time, solve any service disruption in a timely manner, and offer a more personalized attention to users. So to do that, they demanded two main things from tech solutions, from tech providers. One of that was to be able to broker trips to taxis automatically. And the second was to be able to set up the service and launch in 48 hours. So for the first one, we used our feature called trip brokering, which is the ability to include third-party operators into any demand-responsive transport service. So what it means, it allows PTOs to have their very well-dimensioned fleet for the base demand, and then count with external non-dedicated vehicles that hopefully are already in the streets, such as taxis or ride-hailing or any other transport operator, to cover and to reinforce the service, so they don't have to have empty vehicles as we so many times see. So this provides a lot of flexibility for public transport operators to use. You can have just the normal fleet with your minibuses and then some extra taxis on the road. But for example, the way Palma did it, they had the main fleet was based on taxis, and they would use their minibus whenever they see there was enough demand to do so. So it works both ways, and it depends how PTOs want to use it. And what happens is that the non-dedicated vehicles, whenever they get bookings because they're closed and they're available, our app would tell them about the booking, and they can ask, and they can accept or reject that trip. If they reject it, then it goes along to the next available driver, and so on. While the dedicated vehicle will the system will just send them automatically the trips that they have to follow without this option. So it was a great idea and a great function for them to develop this service. And I mentioned they wanted to launch in 48 hours. It was a bit of a challenge, but we managed to do the initial configuration, the training of the staff, the first tests on the ground, and of course the translation to both the rider and the driver app into Spanish and Catalan, and all the training material as well. And of course the vast majority of work was on their side, on the ground. They certainly don't recommend to launch this in 48 hours, but just to show you that it's possible. It's made to do that, and it's quite quick to configure. And then another thing that was quite innovative of the way they're using it. So usually on-demand transport, we're talking about a zone and some vehicles that are picking up and dropping off people inside this area, hopefully connecting it to a mass transport solution. And what they wanted is to follow the exact route that the previous fixed line was following, because they're operating with taxis. They don't want people to be able to use taxis and go anywhere, but just to connect with the bus, because this is a feeder to their bus service. So we managed to make it quite strict in that sense, and we managed to put time rules as well. So just to show you that it could go as fixed as almost a fixed line, we call it semi-fixed line, or a complete DRT solution in the same city, in the same platform, and you can do it in seconds. Regarding the service evolution, so we started with 2 zones and a couple of their minibuses and 20 taxis to begin with. They reached out to all the 1,200 taxis in Palma. Within a week, they had enrolled 10% of them, so 120, and more or less they have between 10 and 20 and 20 taxis every time. So the service is guaranteed in all the zones. With time, now it's been 9 months, and now they have been able to replace all these 14 zones, and they have some coupling tests. Regarding the weekly trips, we had the peak during summer, and then they saw a little, let's say, seasonal peak for this very weird summer that they had, and that way they had to use a bit more of their minibuses. And they were reaching something like 1,200 trips a week. Now it's a bit in decline, and I'll show you why. The reason is that as any of these kind of services, especially if you launch it very quickly without having like a proper participation process, it caused a lot of noise, and then both the users and the city council have decided to bring back one of these fixed line of these on-demand lines to fix again. And what they took the advantage to just see what happened with the data, to just make it a better line, to optimize it. And that's the second function I wanted to highlight about demand responsive transport in regards to public transport. And it's one, that it brings people closer to public transport when there is no availability. So it provides accessibility to people. That's the function we know. And two, that it can act also as a planning tool for more efficient fixed lines. And this is what we call flipping public transport on its head, and it's the ability to quickly prototype, run a pilot for on-demand, gather data, analyze those travel patterns, and then decide if you want to keep the on-demand service or you want to relaunch a fixed line. And that's how we see a bit the future of DRT in complement with public transport. It's been proven that as a first and last mile solution, it's quite efficient, especially for those who cannot access any other kind of transport. And it has shown during this pandemic that it has more resilience than fixed lines, and there are a few studies that says so. So we see like a perfect fit for public transport to provide this kind of ability to adapt immediately to any variation on demand, because we can see that demand can change overnight as it did. So we can provide this adaptability and therefore a bit more resilience to public transport. So thank you. That was what I wanted to share with you.
Thank you, Camila. It was indeed nice to see such a solution that we have been discussing so much in the latest years, but the momentum was never the perfect. We would rely on pilots, and unfortunately the COVID pushed again to another solution that might be a good solution for the future. And we got some specific questions. I had one, if I can start.
Of course.
Because I was wondering, after the pilot and after the good results that you've got, are they willing to continue with this pilot or make it for real? And by they, I mean the cooperation between the taxis, EMT, municipality. How did that part is working? How is that part working?
That is working as we speak. So in this moment, they're trying to make it continue for last year, like to launch a proper public procurement and to continue. As I said, they're bringing now back one of the lines into fixed, and they might analyze if there are others that are worth putting back into a fixed configuration. And when they have that ready, they're going to present it to the city council and see if it's approved for a proper procurement. But it's definitely been a challenge to make it stay longer. So let's hope it does.
Imagine.
Maria,
Yes.
3 questions from the great Robert Stussy. One, minimum maximum time to get the service going. That's one thing. Another question is the price per passenger. And a third question is the taxi gives what price? The value of the tariff, or is that subsidized and the passenger doesn't pay the full price on the taximeter? How exactly does it work?
So EMT reached an agreement with the taxi drivers, and they pay them. So it's heavily subsidized towards the user. The user only pay the transfer. It means the pay, as it 90% of the trips are multimodal. They're meant to be a feeder to the bus service. So once they pay the bus, they have access to this transfer. So for the user is for free, this last mile or first mile, and then EMT agreed a fee to pay the drivers based on the distance that they cover, and that was also the reason to make it that, as I showed you, the very strict line with the stops, so it was very easy to identify.
That's a fascinating project. And what about political decision makers, or I mean, when they heard that they'd be paying taxi fares, taxi trips to public transport passengers, did they feel uncomfortable about it, or was it an easy sell?
it's just a matter of checking some numbers, and they laugh because they say what costs us to run empty buses has no comparison to what we pay to taxi drivers for every trip, even for the 1,200 when they were at the peak. So there's no comparison. I think for operators, it's evident that it's way more expensive, no? So
could you explain into a bit more detail? How does that work? How it's more expensive to pay for an empty bus? Like,
yes,
how much
absolutely.
Expensive? How much?
Unfortunately, I don't have the numbers from they don't want to share their numbers yet, but if you calculate, at least here in Spain, Barcelona, more or less, to have a bus of 200,000 euros a year, if you can save that and just pay a few taxi trips, I think it's way convenient.
Really interesting.
I missed the advance kind of waiting time that you asked in the beginning. So they can do pre-booked for a couple of weeks, if I'm mistaken. I'm actually gonna quickly check, and then until on demand. So real on demand, real time, or pre-booked. So it could be both.
A simple and fascinating project. Maria, that's all. I'm sure that during the discussion, more interesting things will come up.
Thank you, Pedro. And thank you, Camila. So I would invite now Indre to join us to pronounce properly her surname. And she will be talking us about mobility as a service for and beyond time of crisis. And while she tells us how to pronounce her surname and share the screen, I can make a brief introduction about herself. So Indre, she's leading the Mobility Impact Initiative at Trafi, the Mobility as a Service partner for cities. And for her, sustainable mobility means no private cars in the city. And she's working closely with academia and industry partners on this mass and incentives that could influence, and she will definitely tell us a bit more about that. So up to you.
Yes.
Andrés.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, you did almost right with my surname. It's pronounced Blues Junita, but no worries. That's a challenge even for native Lithuanians, so that's okay. And Indre is totally fine. So I hope you all still have some energy for this last part of the session. My name is Indre, and I'll talk today about the resilience of mass or the cities and how can they be more resilient with mass services. And as Maria mentioned, I'm the impact manager at Trafi, and we are a technology company helping cities to orchestrate mobility as a service systems. And our mobility as a system deployments are currently running in Berlin. So the well-known app Yelby is actually running our technology. Several cities in Switzerland, more cities in Germany are coming, and also some global deployments later on in the year. So today I would like to talk about how MaaS helps to maintain the momentum in resilient city and how it actually adds to the sustainable mobility. So in the beginning of the year, we saw this dreamy picture, or at least a big changes on our streets, and while it had some negative effects on shared transport, as we saw already in most of those presentations, we also saw a lot of dreamy scenarios, and we saw how cities could look like when streets are given back to the people. I'm sure most of you can recognize some of those scenarios, or at least relate with that, because we saw similar pictures in most of the cities. And also, as we heard from some presentations already, it's super important to think about not only how can better transport to fill in these streets, but how can those streets be brought back to the people, and how do we make the space in general more livable and enjoyable. So what we are asking at Trafi is how can we maintain that momentum, and how can urban mobility support that instead of just being the major priority? How can it fit into the livable city scenario per se? And while I'm sure for this group, the key disruptor of sustainable mobility is pretty obvious, to some audiences is still something that must be highlighted. So it's clear that it's a private automobile that's disrupting the scenario of sustainable mobility or resilient city. And the shortcut innovations such as electrification, autonomous vehicles, digitalization of the fleet, all those are super important innovations, but they do not change the problem per se. And as long as each of us will keep on driving in the private car, whether electric or not, the situation in the cities won't change. And also it's important to look at sustainable mobility from the perspective, not only from the environmental perspective, which can be at least partly solved by electric fleets, but also from social and governmental perspectives, and just the bigger picture, what the car-centric cities car centricity is doing to our cities. So for Trafi, a viable alternative has always been seen as a holistic orchestration of mobility network, or MAS in the other words. And the easiest explanation of that would be the overall supply of mobility modes on one hand, and on the other hand, the individual on-demand preferences. Or put it simpler, the spectrum of all mobility choices and the fully personalized access to your favorite one. And during and post-COVID, we saw that we actually got some proofs of that concept. So I would like to share a few studies that we ran since the beginning of COVID. So first one we did with Porsche Consulting in Berlin, and it was actually done on the data of Yelbin, a mobility as a service app in Berlin. And the key takeaway from here is that, well, first and most obvious fact is that urban traveling habits have changed. But the key metric here is that individual shared transport recovered the most, and it actually became and remained more popular option as of today. And another even more fascinating research from mobility as a service perspective has been this research that we've done with Mobility Institute Berlin. So we were comparing different mobility applications in the city of Berlin, and precisely purely public transport apps versus multimodal mobility app such as Yelbi in this case. And the insights were pretty shocking. So we saw that actually come back and return to public transport was faster via multimodal apps in comparison with purely public transport apps. Just a few examples of what might have made a difference, and how Yelbi app was dealing with, or how the information during COVID was changed on Yelbi app in order to maintain trust and loyalty of the consumers. So first of all, as naturally, Yelbi would have been a public transport first app. So always, if it is the best option, or if it's nearly as good as other modes of shared transport, it would always prioritize and promote public transport options. While during the pandemic, it was prioritizing the routes with more social distance. Also, the complete real-time disruption information was always displayed, placed on the app. So if some public transport lines are cut or delayed, or if some other shared transport fleets are changed, people would see it in the meantime. And also, Yelbi app became a central point of communication for other safety metrics. So always on the kind of most popular spot of the app, we would have the real-time, always updated link to the website with the governmental safety instructions and data. So instead of only giving a mobility data or only PT data, it would give the full scope of choices of mobility in real time, plus additional safety information. From there, we can see some pretty clear trends that all of those research results are giving us. So as I mentioned already, first of all, faster return to public transport via mass platforms, and it can be explained as simply as people want flexibility and options. They are not, or at least post-pandemic, they are not maybe against public transport per se, or maybe they would start trusting the public transport if they would see it in comparison with other options, along with some other data, safety data supporting that. The second trend that we saw is the switch to short-term public transport tickets. So basically what it tells us is that on-demand planning is taking over the habitual commute, and that's again a big information for public transport authorities to take into account, because in the biggest cities, habitual traveling or monthly tickets, yearly tickets would be the biggest source of income for the public transport authorities, and this trend is changing. So again, how can public transport authorities in cities adapt and catch up with that trend and suggest the alternatives that people would be in favor of. And the third insight is that, well, in general, we can say that mass increases the usage of public transport, because we saw that public transport usage re-increased. Yes, it didn't get back yet to the normal or pre-COVID state, but other shared transport increased and didn't drop. So the total consumption of shared transport via mass platforms is bigger. And this can easily be extracted into 3 recommendations for cities. So first of all, incentivizing more sustainable travel modes. So again, if those are given in comparison with the habitual traveling on one platform, so people don't need to jump from place to another, but they can see the metrics for themselves, they would be potentially be more in favor of using more sustainable travel modes. Also, one seamless access point to that is crucial. As I mentioned, the app jumping or payment via different platforms is never going to compete then with the comfort of private automobiles, so it has to be as seamless as possible. And also, obviously, the trustworthiness of public transport and data-driven incentives on how to incentivize that mode back to pre-COVID state. And all 3 put together, we believe, makes mass viable alternative. But very quickly to mention also another research that we initiated recently, we are measuring if this great alternative in theory actually today already reduces the number of private cars in the streets. We know that car industry has done a tremendous job in incentivizing automobile for over a decade. It has brought to us as the most convenient, most wanted, most favorite travel option. And this habit is deeply in our minds as of today. But we are asking and thinking if this habit can be changed, and if technology, incentives, different kind of communication can promote more sustainable mobility to masses. Can it make the first choice? And can it actually be something more than a trend, but actually became a habit? So these are some of the questions that we are running for our research, and I'm hoping to share some insights with you early next year. And for now, I'm happy to brainstorm and to discuss how can we mitigate against car centricity and make it stay post-COVID. Thank you.
Thank you, Indra. It was quite interesting to see a different example, because we have been touching in all the other topics, and it was nice to see the impact of COVID also in mobility as a service and micro-mobility modes, as you showed as well. So I see already a question from Pedro, which is the question from Indra.
Yeah, so there are no questions yet. Another very interesting presentation. So how would you characterize car centricity?
Well, yeah, first of all, I think it has a lot to do with the habit that I mentioned at the end, with the incentives that car industry has been bringing to us for over a century. That's simply deeply in our minds when we think about traveling option, especially, I mean, I think longer traveling or intercity traveling, that would be the main option, but also in for urban traveling, for most of the people, that's still a way to go without hesitation or without even thinking differently. So that is, I think, the major habit that should be changed, or where communication and incentives and collaboration of different institutions could support. And also, well, basically the infrastructure, or how our cities look like today, and what we saw has been changing during the COVID, when parking slots has been turned into bars and restaurants, or city plazas where becoming a beach. Like in Vilnius, we had the public beach on the main plaza, which used to be packed with cars usually. So that is how the great examples of different scenario, which again, unfortunately, is changing because people are back to their private cars.
So if we want to take cars out of center stage, what do we want to put instead in the center of the stage?
I think you said it very well, that out of central stage. So I think it would be just utopus to say that we want private cars out completely. So definitely they are still a good option for some traveling, as long as we are not one person sitting in a huge automobile alone in the middle of the city. So for some options it should still remain, but yeah, definitely for the urban traveling, for the city center traveling, we don't need that. And I think we shouldn't name one travel option. It's more of a master key to all other traveling options. And that is precisely what mobility as a service is bringing to us, or could bring to us in theory, and if orchestrated well. And unfortunately, we only see a few examples yet running on that base, because it shouldn't be the company-centered approach where every player is competing for their share for their market share. It should be something instead the holistically driven, and something that would really consolidate all the traveling options and would really give the best comparison for the citizens in real time. So that could be this master key, which would replace one mode of private car.
Thank you. So Robert Stussy says, excellent and nice presentation. If Robert Stussy says that, it's because it's true. And a question by Jorge Pinto Souza: can't these multimodal, strongly digital-based, somehow complicated mobility solutions be a factor of social exclusion, for example, for the elderly, migrants, etc.?
Yeah, very, very good point. I think, first of all, they shouldn't be complicated. That's the key, and that's where what I mentioned among free recommendations to cities. So seamless access point is the key. So it really should be, easy to consume. It should be seamless. It should be like what we see the armies of brilliant minds doing in private companies such as Uber, Lyft, and the Silicon Valley's companies have the armies of UX designers and people that are very skilled in driving our experience and actually making it as seamless as it could be. This should also be brought to the cities and to mobility as a service. So that is also one more point why we believe collaboration between public authorities and private companies is the key, because we also saw some mass deployments that would be run purely by public authorities, and unfortunately they don't have such skills or such a speed or capacity to innovate and to do it on the best practices of the private sector. So making it seamless instead of complicated is the key, and that could actually play against the exclusion transition. So I think the car centricity is also one thing that drives towards transit deserts and exclusion for the purely areas or for the suburbs and cities and people who cannot afford private cars, or especially with sustainability norms, when we see cities also are raising charges on parking fees or entering city center for the elder vehicles. So that will also play as exclusion point for the poorer people from the suburbs. And if we have mobility as a service running, playing instead of that could actually solve that problem.
Thanks a lot, Indra. Maria, you have 25 minutes to manage as a moderator. The floor is yours.
Easy, I guess. So thank you, Indra. So I think I will invite now all the speakers. So we will try to have all of you with the cameras on so that it's a nicer discussion and we can see each other. And we will discover now how ready these systems nowadays are to enable that we all join at the same time. And we are quite a few. So if I can, while you all join, I can make some brief points about the session. So I think it was obvious that we saw in this session that it was very much data-driven and that we are looking very much to the data to understand people's behavior. So the first thought that we saw with the data is that it's actually possible to change people's behavior when you have specific measures in place. So we saw an increase of walking, increase of cycling, increase also of private car, which is an issue or could be an issue. We saw the decrease in public transport. And on the other hand, we saw examples from the cities mentioning how they deal with it. So they also took the opportunity to facilitate cycling, walking spaces in terms of infrastructure. Of course, now the big question is, will they stay temporary or will they become permanent? So the idea for this moderation discussion, this discussion part, would be to see how each one of you think how the mobility will look like in the future. And I don't say after COVID, because we are still not sure when this will end, if this will end, if the vaccine will arrive next year to everybody, or how we can tackle. So I would invite our speakers to tell us how do they see it in the short-term mobility. What are the trends that you see that will stay? Will public transport still don't have enough quota? Will mass take over? So, Sándor, perfect. Volunteer.
A volunteer. Well, yeah, an open door. I think everybody over the last months got a crash course in working from home. And also a lot of new exciting tools are being developed to be more able to work together online in a more friendly way. Organizations are changing rapidly, so I think that's a thing that will stay. So I think we will also see less traffic during the morning and evening rush hour. That would be very positive because the most traffic jams occur in the morning and evening rush hour. So if we can spread it a little bit more over time, that would be perfect. I think there is a threat that public transport is becoming less popular. There's a sort of a trend going on that people maybe want to move towards a more private vehicle. But I hope that will change back to normal after the COVID crisis. And I think the bicycle is worldwide really the big winner at the moment. I think it's the fastest growing means of transport worldwide. Cities are really adjusting their infrastructure to make it more friendly for cyclists. In the Netherlands, we are already doing it very good, but in other countries, you see a rapid development of all nice bicycle infrastructure. So, I think people don't want to give up their space again to cars after the crisis. At least that's what I hope.
In terms of data, how do you see, are policy makers going to use now more the data that we are collecting in several different ways, like we saw in your presentation with smartphones. We saw the interchange that Anna showed us with the camera base. So there are different ways. So how do you see data and this digitalization innovation aspect in the future?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think data will become even more important in the future. You saw it throughout all the presentations that were given today. Everybody had some sort of component of data, of insights to base their policies and insights on. So I think that will be also increasing rapidly, and there will be more sources available to study our mobility patterns. I think Anna also raised her hand to respond to my.
It was going to be a complementary add-on, not a contradiction. I think what's really important back with my city authority hat on is that I think a lot of these temporary measures, they're emergency measures for most cities. So it's kind of like, okay, well, we have 6 months to deal with a very tricky situation. What can we do? And due to the urgency, not a lot of planning has gone into place. So back when I was working for Transport Greater Manchester, whilst there was a lot of cycling during the summer, because of course nice weather is great. Who doesn't want to go out and go on their bike, because now people are working from home, so they can take breaks more flexibly. However, this was really impacting bus operators to run their services, because a lot of the cycle lanes were taking, their bus lanes, and then the buses were forced to go into the traffic lanes. So, of course, the journeys were more delayed, and a lot of people were not able to complete their journeys. So I think a more human-centered approach is needed to understand the dimension of each locality and what services they need, because social demographics are different, very different from neighborhood to neighborhood, and knowing what works best. And I think particular solutions like DRT, this is probably the best time for them to penetrate the market, because this is like the best time you can think of, okay, well, we want more regular, smaller services that can carry not as many passengers. So to me, I think like DRT solutions, this is great. Of course, if this was 20 years in the future, autonomous vehicles, shared electric autonomous vehicles, not individual autonomous vehicles, would also be great. But as long as is this demand responsive, because now people are more flexible. So I think this is a really good opportunity for these new modes to penetrate the market and to basically leverage the flexibility of citizens and businesses.
And I think, Frederik, yes, let's hear the city.
Just one thing. I think the potential of cycling in a city like Brussels, and probably in other cities as well, is just so big that bringing out this potential now during the pandemic is final. I think people will not abandon the place that they won over these last few months. We just have to see if we have to correct or change the road layouts that we put into place, because they create some traffic problems. But in the short time, I see that these people will keep on cycling. That's what happened during previous catastrophes in Brussels. We had terrorist attacks in 2016, where the metro was put out for 3 weeks, and we had a blockage with truck drivers in 2003. And each time people took on more cycling, and each time these people have been keeping cycling. So I'm quite positive that the change that we experience now will be a permanent change, just because we have this enormous potential in cycling in Brussels that's unused at the moment, or was unused before the pandemic.
But just one question on that. But is it already something that you are discussing to make, for example, the Corona cycle lanes permanent, or that's a discussion for the future, depending on several other factors, as financial issues as well?
It will depend, of course, on the evaluation of each project, each individual project. We have a sort of evaluation procedure measuring the impacts on all kinds of factors. And actually, in the 40 kilometers, there's only 3 of the projects that are problematic, and one of them has been changed already. Another one will have to be modified to be able to continue to exist. But all of them have proven useful and necessary to attract more cyclists. So that's also a thing we keep in mind.
Yes, László?
Yeah, just 3 thoughts. First is that we've been talking for years, like, okay, we need changes in, demand. People shouldn't move around that much, and we should widen the peaks. And even the big cities said, like, oh my God, no more tourists because we are like dying, And this has all happened finally. Obviously, it went down to nearly 0, which is probably the other side of the horse. But I think this is a momentum we should kind of try to sort of save or build on, and not just let things go back to business as usual. A second, I think many things have been, just proved to be working, like home office, Everybody was like, no, in home office, you won't work. You will just, Facebook all day. And this just proved to be working. So I think decision makers are in a position now that they can make braver decisions finally. So they don't have to be afraid of certain decisions because we have some proof. And final thought, I think, especially in the spring, I experienced people started to value neighborhoods. Sometimes we just rushed, from home and like, piling up stuff at home. Like, okay, in long Christmas nights, I shall do this and that. And for years, you just wouldn't touch it because you have no time. You just rush to your bus and whatever. And so this is something where probably, and I've seen in your presentations, like people are walking, after lunch and dinner. So I think there is also a better understanding of our neighborhoods, which is also a more human level of city space. And I think this is something we should really don't forget.
Thank you, László, indeed. And Camila?
Yeah, I think you've pointed out many of the strategies. I agree that this should be, or this year in general had been the year to make bold decisions in cities, and many have from Brussels, for instance, and from Budapest. I'm based in Barcelona, and Barcelona is a good example as well. Of course, lots of improvisation, but there's no time to actually plan. But I think that's the key, just as I mentioned, also rapid prototyping, and then with the methodology that you have at hand, like tactical urbanism, and then decide what's best. But just to bring up Barcelona, it came to, I don't know if you saw that the city council just finally launched the super block plan for the whole Eixample neighborhood, which was planned before, and now with all these tactical urbanism pilots, it came now again into the topic, and it's formally a plan. So I think it helped accelerate that. So for cities, I would say, like dense cities, cycling, walking, and don't forget public transport. And I think we also have to think about, and some of you mentioned it, and it's the suburbans and the rural areas, and how are we going to keep connecting them. And I think that's a very good value, especially for demand responsive transport and for these flexible services to be taken into account. And I think that's going to be very useful.
And Indra.
Yeah, I would like just to add to this. I think, yeah, I'm in love with Barcelona. I mean, it's always has been my favorite city, and now with the super block plans, it's just amazing to see what they are doing, what has been done already in the exemplary areas, and now to see this expanding. But also other cities like Paris with 15-minute city, or Oslo completely banning the cars from the city center. Those are beautiful examples and really interesting to see how they will develop. But I think the trend that I would like to highlight from this is more of a data-driven approach, so a more kind of a data standardization that would help cities and companies to evaluate those changes and basically to adapt the remaining ecosystem the rest ecosystem to those changes. So, for example, if we make a 15-minute city, how, as Camila said, how the suburbs will be connected. So, does it take mobility hubs? Does it take different lanes of public transport? Does it completely change our travel behavior and people actually barely go and move from district to another? So, really having data-driven approach and not data that could be sort of greenwashed and shortcutted, but really something running on standards and that could be shared more openly. I think that that is a golden currency for the upcoming years to develop more innovations.
Thanks. Yes, Anna.
Sorry, just going back to Camila's point with regards to the difference between rural and urban, I think, and this is a conversation I've been having recently with a lot of colleagues on LinkedIn as well, it's the difference in provisions for cities and rural communities for walking and cycling facilities. So this is something that we've realized as well at Humanizing Autonomy between doing projects in the UK, Germany and Japan. There seems to be the issue throughout where you leave a city and that's it, the pavement just stops. So if you're in a rural community and you want to go for a walk and you don't have a park or a field nearby, then really where do you go? Because a lot of the roads that cause a lot of severance in the rural communities, where it kind of like goes right through the middle, are trafficked a lot by fleet, like heavy logistics, and so they don't really travel exactly very slowly. So there's a really big issue at looking more of the wider accessibility, because of course when you think of the communities that live there, it usually ends up being older people who usually have to have a private vehicle, just because otherwise there's no way for them to get around. So I think cities need to have a really good look at the infrastructure provision as well as the services, if they do want to continue championing active travel. And of course, looking at how e-scooters and other forms of new micromobility will impact this. So yeah, that was just a thought, not necessarily a comment, but yeah, I think that would be probably one for László and other city authorities as to how they're looking to combat this. Because if you look at most national data sets, there are very few, I think for the UK, like just over 30% are more than 1 meter wide on pavements across the whole country. And if you think about like in reality, that's so small. And if you have, a wheelchair user or a mom with a baby, then that's not really a lot of space to conduct social distancing or even just walk alongside your partner. So yeah, that's not great, and it wouldn't make someone really want to walk if they don't have the facilities required.
Yeah, I don't know if one of the municipalities would like to comment on this part, or the other speakers on the space management, which I think it's the next problem or challenge that we have in front, because we want to facilitate all this multimodal system, but it's a lot of modes, a lot of different plus walking, and it's just the space we have. So we need somehow to take some priorities, and space management is something quite challenging for the moment. Maybe László, Frederik, you would like to comment?
Yeah, we are piloting some of these things. Like we've been involved in European Union funded research and innovation project, Cities for People, where we first piloted like one mobility point. I think it's probably a good practice in Germany and here and there. But for Budapest, yeah, we trialed it at one location, and like last year we piloted it in like 3 or 4, and then we are in a trial of actually discussing with a neighborhood level, I should say, but it's both the city and the district is involved. So I think it's going to be a step-by-step approach, like how we can spread the idea. And this is about something in a way combined with inner city measures to sort of cut out the transit traffic. So that's another municipality, but pretty much inner city. So I think these small elements can be can be put on another level, because it's less risky, I should say, for decision makers, because many times it's just the case like, oh, that's a nice idea, but, and there was always a but, and probably these times we have less buts, so we can be more brave. And yeah, from the Transport Authority, we pretty much try to support that.
Thank you, László. Yes, indeed, we keep talking always on the policymakers, and I was also wondering, and it was from a discussion with Indre, that and what about the citizens? Because we are the ones that policymakers are defending too, and they are trying to make policies adequate for our needs and our wishes. So what do you think the citizens and ourselves should change? What do we need to change? Because we keep saying that we see this as more sustainable, and then we still pick our private car, if we can consider that less sustainable, to do whatever we are going to do. So what do you think the citizens should actually do more that we are apparently not doing? Yes, a volunteer. Anna.
I think just, I don't know how totally relevant it is, but looking at information provision. So, for example, back in last year in March, the city of Manchester released a map of roads within the city centre and the level of pollution. And that was then used by people to travel the city. And of course, back then I was working for the city, and I'd get messages from my friends saying, oh, I'm going down this road, this is really polluted, should I make another journey? And I think it's all down to how information is communicated and how people are educated. So it has to be very much a two-way feed of information, not just, at the third planning stage of saying, here are your options, 1, 2, or 3. Which one do you least hate? And this is the one we're gonna consider for our benefits cost ratio and business cases. So I think it's all about like what information is provided to the citizens, so they feel like they have some sort of powers, because of course through like taxation and council tax, everyone sort of pays their way into the city, and to some people they feel really strongly. And of course, making a lot more effort to integrate sort of disability groups into these decisions is key, because if cities provide for people with different impairments, then everything is accessible to everyone. And then you don't have to think of issues for elderly users in the future that, that you didn't really account for when the design was actually implemented. So yeah, I don't know if that was like a really roundabout answer, but I think just very straightforward and easy communication. I think there's examples of poor communication where cities release consultation papers that are like 160 pages and expect people to read them. But when you look on like the average reading age, I think for like most cities in the world is really, really low. So really, how inclusive are we being with that two-way communication? And that's something that should be considered not just for public companies, but also for private companies as well, to make their websites really accessible so people do feel like they have the power of information readily available.
The accessibility for all.
Yeah.
Yes, Indre?
Yeah, and just to add to Anna's point about the communication on sustainability, I think that's a very broad and interesting topic in general. Like, I love this joke saying that if sustainability or global warming would have the same PR person as COVID had, we would be saved. And that is really true, because we see a lot of very poor examples of how companies, cities, and different players communicate about sustainability. Yes, maybe it is sort of a new topic, but yeah, we really don't see a lot of good practices on how to incentivize more sustainable choices, from really consumer goods to more global changes. So that is really something to tackle, and I think it's actually not up to one institution or city or company to do that. It's really it's a collaborative effort that should be done. And in terms of mobility, that's exactly the case, and that is what we see in the city where our mass is currently running already. So if, for example, city is doing a great job in communicating about public transport and more sustainable modes, and actually Berlin is one of the leading examples of public transport communication. Like from year to another, they're always winning the awards for best public transport advertising because they really have like cool and funky approach there. But if that's a solo effort, and for example, then companies on the other hand are still incentivizing the employees with, you know, giving a car or giving donations for fuel, then this effort will go nowhere. So it really should be something more of a collaboration between different institutions, private and public.
Indeed. I'm not sure, Pedro, if we have any question on the chat that will go, and I will also have a look to the pool that I launched, but I'm not sure if that works. So...
Hi, no more questions. No more questions on our chat box.
Yeah, I tried to create a pool, but I guess it didn't work out.
Yeah, I think it worked. It worked.
No,
yeah,
worked.
At least. And see, which scenario do you think is more likely to happen in the future?
Yeah.
But I saw the show results, but I couldn't see the answers.
The answers are, A, do we go back to the pre-COVID situation? That's 17%. Will we move towards more sustainable options? That's 67%, 68%. And do we move on to less sustainable solutions compared with pre-COVID? 14%. So all in all, I would say 2/3 or more of that is pretty optimistic.
Yeah, it's pretty optimistic because I think we as humans, we are creatures of habit. So, well, the data will tell us later what we're really going to do, but we could also move back to normal again after COVID. But I hope that option B will be the result.
Well, the services that are provided are essential because, as you know, the infrastructure and the services available, they create patterns of behavior. And so we must really change what is available. We reached the end of the session. Can I take a good picture of all of you?
Of course.
Like get your best smile, get close to the camera and say goodbye.
I don't know what Pedro is.
Pedro, did you go backstage to take the
making
picture?
screenshots or something?
Yes, I made the screenshots. You all look beautiful, and thank you very much. Anna, Maria, to you the last words.
So I think we are just on time. So I think we had quite a nice session. It's a topic that we all like, and it's the more realistic topic that we can be discussing because it's happening for 9 months, and the reality is that we don't really know what will happen after, but we have pretty nice ideas of how to use this also as an opportunity to promote more sustainable mobility. That's what we all aim for. So I hope, I agree with the scenario B from the pool. So I hope we manage to get out of this, taking some measures, some more risky measures from the policymaker side that would lead us to a more sustainable mobility. And I would like to thank all the speakers. It was pretty nice to see different opinions, and again, digitalization, innovation, and data all over the presentation. So I think it was proven to be a quite resilient way out, or to find a way out for the crisis. And if there are no more other questions, I hope the participants also enjoy the discussions, and looking forward for the next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Parabéns, Maria. Muito bem. Muito obrigado.
Nada, Pedro.
Estiveste impecável. Agora só temos de descobrir uma maneira de terminar a sessão.
Pois não sei se será.
Não há ninguém que estão a dizer the end. Talvez se nós os dois sairmos.
Ou se continuarmos a falar, matamos o resto da audiência e eles desaparecem.
Olha, um beijinho para ti, está bem?
Sim. Tchau, Pedro.
Vou sair e vou ver como é que se desliga isto.
Sim,
tá?
eu vou sair também.
Muitos parabéns. Muito obrigado, Maria.
Obrigada.